behavior. Listener discretion is advised. The VOT Network presents the Voices of Terminus show with your hosts, Yarnilla, Lexer, and Joshua.
Welcome everyone to the Voice of Terminus show. I'm your host Jan, joined by Josh. Say hello, Josh.
Hey guys.
Then we have this guy to the left of me. Say hello. That's you.
Hey there. Go sports ball.
And we have a very special guest with us, but before I introduce him, we have the wonderful Shy in the background, who's going to be taking all your questions, keeping an eye on chat, keeping an eye on Xmoko especially. Say hello, Shy.
Hello. Yeah, you cannot trust Smoko at all.
So we thought, we're going to talk crafting this week, and no better way to do this by getting the man himself. Everybody knows him within the community, Nephele, who does a lot of work for Pantheon Crafters. Has a lot of deep insight, so welcome here, man. Finally, great to have you on.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thanks for having me on. It's great.
Neff, I love that Yarn knows how deep you are.
hey, this is still PG, okay? Right, so.
Well, how am I not being PG? Prove it.
Anyway, so today's talking points, we're going to look at the crafting design goals in Pantheon, itemization, loots and crafted, content quests, and Corey's comments on alternate progression. So, and today we're going to let basically our guest run the show, and we're going to basically go by his thoughts, bring the discussion to everybody. So you in chat as well, you have any points, anything you want to add, please tag Bugzor so she can bring it up at the appropriate time. If you have any questions for our guests, again, send her questions, and we'll get to them. So Neff,
over to you.
Yours.
Oh yeah, no pressure at all. So yeah, if we want to talk about crafting, I hope everybody's had a chance to listen to the developer roundtable from a few weeks ago. Personally, it was something that I'd been waiting for a really long time, and it was really great to hear them finally give Corey some time to kind of lay out what his vision is for crafting, even if he didn't go into as much detail as we really wanted. But if you haven't seen that roundtable yet, definitely go check it out. It's about an hour and 10 minutes, and it's worth every minute. If you're like me and you don't really remember what you hear too well, but you remember what you read, there's a summary up on Pantheon Crafters for it. But there's a lot of really good information in there. Anyway, at the end of the roundtable, Corey spent a few minutes and he talked about some of his goals for crafting and harvesting in Pantheon. This is actually really important because they haven't exactly locked the design yet. It could still change. So this is our chance as a community to really talk about, what we want to see and how things could play out, and what could go wrong, especially like what are the risks that we're worried about. So maybe just to kick us off, I'll just start with one of those design goals, and we can kind of take it and run from there. Does that sound good to you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just start with the first one that he laid out, which is that crafting must be approachable. They want it to be intuitive. They want it to be easy to get into and understand. They don't want to scare people off from trying it by making it too complex or too difficult right at the beginning. Corey had a really good example during the dev roundtable about how in Vanguard, a lot of people just gave up on crafting because it was too hard when they were getting started. They got a lot of player feedback that the system just was too complicated, too difficult to understand, and people just gave up on trying to do it. So they want to avoid that problem with Pantheon, but they don't want to make it simple either. They don't want to have another crafting system like WoW where you're just clicking and stuff magically gets created. They want there to actually be some gameplay there and some depth. They just don't want it to have a steep learning curve. So, maybe that's a good point to talk about, because I know, like Lex said, that he's not even really a crafter in many games. Like, how do you take something like this and make it easy for people to get into, but still have some depth and some meat there to it, so that it keeps you interested long term?
I'll just kick off with a few comments myself. I think that if you're an experienced MMO player, either you love crafting or you don't like crafting, and that's fair, all good and well to you. So it doesn't matter what kind of a system they put into Pantheon, people will play it or do the crafting if they want to do it, because they love crafting. You're obviously trying to make the sweet spot for new people that have no clue about MMOs and everything, and I agree with that. I think they have to make it an easy learning curve for newbies to come in, and to ramp up the difficulty as it goes through to make sure it's interesting enough for more experienced players.
Yeah, so to top off what Josh said, there are quite a few ways I could go about this. Right? We take the crafting from Vanguard or even EverQuest 2. They were similar in approach. The way to do this, what I would like to see is, obviously, crafting for me is very important. I want to see crafting as a second pillar to the game itself, not just the adventuring side of things, but crafting be something that is meaningful, that somebody can go and spend their entire day doing and feel fulfilled and actually contribute to the community, contribute to the game itself, and even see their progression be contributed as they go along and have meaning. So there's definitely ways to go about this. In most games, basically, you go to a professions trainer, you pick the job that you want. They have a little description of what it is, what you can do. Then you're throwing out these tables, and you're kind of sitting there looking at your recipe books. Like they're quite easy to understand, but they want to try and bring in more people and introduce it to people that have never seen it from this side of the coin, the crafting aspect of a game, how enjoyable it could be. They can actually add it in, smaller steps. So they can have the crafting process at the beginning stages be something where you go to a table and it's a simple, you hit this button and you're flattening out this sword, for instance. Now, the next tier, or the training wheels that you get, basically, you now have to harden it. You're adding an additional metal towards this. So now it's 2 buttons you've got to hit. They kind of like give you a tutorial on how to go through the different steps, how to make the different quality levels, how to modify the crafting, the crafting item itself. I think that would be a good way to go about it, where you bring it in steps. You teach them the basics first. So it's like a typical apprenticeship. You start off with the basics first, then you start learning to do more in-depth stuff, and then finally, you start to design your first item yourself from start to finish. And that's how they could possibly do it. They could have a crafting system in play that teaches you from the ground up in slow steps how it works to a certain point of the game, and then they take the training wheels off, and now it's up to us, because you don't obviously want to have it hand-holdy where everything is presented to you in an easy fashion. We don't want to see you click a button in the wild, start making stuff. We don't want to see that. Crafting has to be done at crafting station, or if for some point or some reason they add in possibilities outside in the wild, which we'll get into maybe later if we lead down that path. But there's definitely ways to go about it. I think that would be a great way to do it. I definitely want to see crafting be a little more than what Vanguard had to offer. And if I look at the early days of EverQuest 2, how it was done, we relied on each crafter. Me as a carpenter, I would have to go to an alchemist who would make me glass vials for when I was making something, in woodworking, or sheets and everything. I would have to go to I can't remember what the other crafter was. I had to get these sheets that I had to bring down to make a pillow and this, that, and the other. And that's also another thing as well. Involve the other crafters around it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up EQ2 and Vanguard because, I think one of the criticisms that players had in EQ2 was that there was too much interdependence. In order to do anything, you needed 2 or 3 other people to make stuff for you to do it. And that was one of the things that SOE nerfed pretty hard, I think 6 months into the game. And then Vanguard, had some of that going on, but not nearly as much. And, at least I was kind of surprised to hear from Corey that people thought Vanguard was too complex and too difficult. But once he mentioned it, I went back and looked, and sure enough, people out there said that they wanted to do crafting, but that it was too complicated and too hard to do. So where's the happy medium there?
The happy medium would be basically that you. So
Sorry, but why was it too difficult? That's what I want to know.
Do you have an answer for that, Neff?
So honestly, I don't know that I have the right answer for that. I did crafting in Vanguard and I thought it was great. But
crafting in Vanguard had different quality tiers that you could basically achieve. And the combination you had to go through to do it, it wasn't easy. You had a success bar and a pristine bar, basically, that would level up, and you had a certain amount of steps you could make mistakes for it to turn out to be a pristine item. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of found it hard, because they weren't hitting this pristine level every time and everything, and it wasn't very easy to do. I was lucky enough to try it out. It wasn't easy, definitely, but that's the challenge, though. I'm surprised that a lot of people found it really, really hard and kind of discomforting, to be honest. So that was basically what it was. Being interdependent, the way I see it happening is how you could go about it to not be like EQ2 is, let's say, for instance, now we do have a carpenter in Pantheon to make furniture for your housing and everything. So instead of having to rely on other crafters, how I would like to see it done is, let's say I'm making a chair. A chair has 4 legs, it has the seat itself, then it has your back, whatever you call that in English, sorry about that, has your thingy. So make those actually 5 components that you have to do. That you make individual components before you make the final component, because that's something I really missed in EverQuest 2 and in a lot of MMOs. Now it's just you click one button, you pick the furniture you want to make, and off you go. You sit there for 30-40 seconds and the item's done. I want to feel like I'm actually doing something. I'm making the seating, I'm making the legs, I'm putting the legs together, and so you have like multiple steps to the end product. But the problem there is, again, a lot of resources are going to be used and a lot of things can go wrong. So they have to find a fine medium in between the basic steps or the base steps to make the final product. They have to find a fine medium on how it's together. Like, for instance, if you've made the 4 legs for the chair and your seat and everything, it shouldn't cost you any further materials when you're making the final product, because you've already got them. Something like that. That's how I would kind of like to see it. I think that would be a fair medium on how to do it. How to go about the whole intensity and pristine stages, because there should be a challenge, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to making individual items based on the quality level. So say Lex and Josh are both blacksmiths, and they make swords, for instance. They're making both an iron sword. There should be quality difference based on how much work they both put into it. If Lex doesn't pay attention to what he's doing, then his sword might be crooked or break easily. But Joshua's taking the time, spending a little bit more time trying to finesse the sword and make it more stable and everything. There should be a difference in quality as well, so that it kind of kind of animate people to pay attention to what they're doing. But crafting shouldn't be a thing where it's like one click and you're done, and all you've got is counter. You're hitting buttons to counter react to certain effects that are thrown at you in between.
Yeah. Okay, interesting.
Next.
So yeah, I want to go back to something you said about progression too, and I think we'll talk more about this too later on. But you mentioned, like, when someone's starting off as a crafter, the idea is they should get simple tasks. And your example of making that chair sort of made me think, like, maybe the items that new crafters make are the simpler ones. Like, maybe instead of making a big two-handed sword, like, you start off making a dagger. That's much easier to do. And then you graduate as your skills grow. You graduate into bigger and more complicated items, and maybe that's how you do it to make it easier for new people to get started without making it too simple for the people that really just love to craft.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely ways to go about it. They could start off with smelting the raw materials. That's one thing you've got to learn, and they can even go as far and still make it challenging for those that do generally love crafting and are used to how it all works in games. They could have different tiers of smelting that can be achieved. So your normal, the new person coming into crafting who wants to have a look and has never done it before, he can learn to smelt. But you, as a more veteran crafter who starts off with learning how to smelt stuff, you might find out new ways or better ways to smelt because you're spending more time doing it. You might use lesser materials. That's a way you could reward people that spend more time actually learning it. You could even have certain requirements come in that you have to achieve. So you can have like little levels inside these individual beginning steps that you have to go through. And once you've basically done that, you've learnt the basics of smelting, you've learnt the basics of forging, the basics of hitting the sword and shaping it and everything. And you could even, like you said, with a dagger, you could have different task levels as well. Like you said, a two-hand sword is going to be a lot harder to make than a dagger would, or a long sword, or a wooden shield against a tower shield out of metal, and so forth. So there's different ways you can go about it. You have like apprenticeship levels of beginning crafting items, and you have the more moderate ones. So you could do it in stages. So you're kind of like actually doing an apprenticeship when you're crafting. Kind of feel immersed as well in that sense. I think that'd be a cool way to do it.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's actually riff off that a little bit, and let's talk about crafting progression. I think in most games, what we see is that crafters, they pick up their trade at whatever guild in their local city, and then they basically just spend all the rest of their time when they're crafting sitting in that city doing crafting. They might go to other cities to learn new recipes or something like that, or they might have to buy them from other players. But there's really no progression outside just learning more recipes or pushing your skills higher or whatever. I think one of the things that the team wants to do in Pantheon, which I'm personally really behind, is they want to break that mold and get crafters out into the world, so that just like an adventurer goes out into the world and has adventures and they explore more and more dangerous places, the crafter should, after their apprenticeship, if you will, they should be leaving that city and going out into the world and doing things out in the world to earn better skills and learn more recipes and that sort of thing. What do you guys think of that? What do you think about, in terms of progressing as a crafter? Like, what should that look like in Pantheon?
I think we've already talked. We actually had a big discussion about this already. For me, it's definitely a lot more than just sitting in your hometown, in your crafting area, making your wares. I think cities should be involved as well. They should offer crafters a means to kind of. But I would love to see crafters be able to become master crafters within a city. and that would give them certain entitlements, or certain privileges. It would open up certain opportunities that only they will achieve. For instance, if you become a master crafter, as an example for bone fast, you're human, bone fast and everything, that allows you to, you might get a discount when you're purchasing goods, local NPC vendors, materials and stuff like that. This might open up new ways for you to actually contribute towards the city. Provide the guards with better swords and this, that, and the other. Build new fortifications for the city walls and this, that kind of stuff. It might even allow you to be able to, let's just go wild with this right now. We're gonna go off the path here, typical VOT style. Let's say, for instance, you are a master crafter within the city, and we have stores. We have stores for it. You can now maybe even take on additional new crafters, actually players, and they become your apprentice. They get like a little bonus for you when they're crafting in your shop or whatever. They gain a little bit of a bonus because of you're a master crafter. You've taken them on. It's kind of like a reward system that you're giving back to the crafters, because that's something that's always been missing. We have mentoring for the adventuring side of things, but we don't have mentoring for crafting side of things. Why not? Why can't somebody learn off of somebody else who's a master crafter and gain some benefits? Going out into the world, for instance, like learning new recipes, I think that should be a must. I should have to, if I want to learn about the special arrows and bows that the halflings make, I have to actually physically go there and spend my time in the halfling city, and actually craft there and speak to the society there and learn all about the recipes and foods.
I think that even adding on to what John's saying about that is actually having your own crafter faction with those guilds within those cities, so that you have to earn a specific level of faction with that guild in order to earn their recipes. And if you earn enough faction over time, you can earn some sort of a unique recipe that's, well, not unique, but unique to that race that you can craft to have with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You can have at the higher tier, you become this master crafter. You've actually achieved it. You spent a lot of time obviously doing it. You're max level. You're a master crafter. You now gain insight and access to unique crafting items that can only be made normally by a halfling. It's kind of something like you're bringing in something new and strange to a society that doesn't know any better. The humans don't know about the halfling longbow that has a awesome effectiveness, has a awesome speed on the bow and how it reacts and everything. It's light as a feather, for instance.
Does it extra add your strength to the bow compared to others?
Exactly, and those are the kind of things that you could possibly do. But crafters should also be able to go out there, and it's not just crafting, right? Crafting, I see a lot of things happen. You've got crafting, harvesting, and the economy. That all kind of are a part of this. Trade skill. I don't see it as crafting. I always see trade skill. For me, it's trade skilling. It's not crafting. It's not harvesting. It's trade skilling. Right? You are a tradesman. You're an adventurer. It's like being a soldier. Look at it from that standpoint. You're a soldier first, and then you have your trade, right? Which is a blacksmith, a weaponsmith, a baker, a this, a that. But first off, you're an adventurer, and then secondly, you got your trade skill. And that's how we should look at crafting. And I think that's the biggest problem that MMOs or games with these things have. They look at it from one standpoint only. They look at it from crafting standpoint, and then they separate it and break it down into different pillars. Or, well, look, you've got the crafting, you've got the adventuring, and then there's the economy, the harvesting, and then there's the economy side of things. No, that should be all part of trade skilling, period. I'm a trade skiller, I'm an adventurer. And then you can have like trade routes being opened up, something that only crafters can possibly do. Crafters will have to go out in the world and try and open up these trade routes to the different cities, so that things can start being shared through local auction houses, through local caravan travels and everything, transfer goods that are from one area to the other, kind of open up a global market in trade and everything. So I would kind of like to see it done. There should be more to it than just banging on a hammer for 4 hours, pressing the same buttons over and over again for 4 hours, and even having some kind of little helper on your keyboard going click, click. No, there should be more to it, definitely.
So it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that that I've pushed for and that I think has resonated with a lot of people is, how do we get crafters to actually get out in the world and do things that aren't just related to buying and selling items? I mean, if you look at every other game, it's you go harvest resources, you make items, and then you sell them to other players, or you give them to NPCs or whatever. But what if you needed, as an adventurer, and I'm looking at Lex here, but what if you needed crafters to repair the guard tower so that the guards could be there to offer you quests, or maybe you needed crafters to build the bridge across the river so that you could get to the raid mob, or maybe you're in the middle of a zone event and you need crafters to rebuild the gate to keep the orc army out. How does that change if Pantheon's able to do that sort of thing? How does that change how we view crafting, and how we view just how the two spheres work together?
It's definitely going to be challenging to do that. It's going to be no easy task to bring the two together. But EverQuest 2 is a prime example of how they do that. EverQuest 2, when I think it was the third or fourth expansion. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Josh. But certain points of expansion, they started to open up this little mini event where you had to build the portals, spires, to the new lands that they were going to bring out, and that required crafters. Crafters had to gather the materials and bring them there and start crafting, and that would be a great way to do it. And VR certainly could do things like that. They could have bridges that are broken down that need crafting, or gates that need rebuilding and things like this, or even you could even have major events happen, world events where cities are under attack, and if we don't pay attention as adventurers alike, the city gates get destroyed. Now they need rebuilding. That kind of brings in that opportunity for crafters to help out, and adventurers are going to always be the first ones to go, hey, there's a bridge here we can get across, or we can go miles and miles and miles around the riverbed and try and fight our way through. People will always pick the shortcut, so they'll be communicating, bring crafters will come there, the adventurers will help gather materials, or actually go out with them to protect them while they gather the materials. It's kind of like a little mini event, so that's where the two collide together and help each other out. So you've got the adventurers fending off the mobs that are trying to attack the crafters and stop them from building the bridge.
I'd like to add another angle onto that when you're done, Jan.
Go on.
Yeah. So in Pantheon, you're going to have your areas that are going to have various environmental effects, such as, let's say, lightning cloud, for instance. There's going to be something like that. Now, if you had your top crafters go into an area that had a spot where your crafters could set up some sort of a lightning rod tower that neutralizes that lightning effect in that area, right? In that way, you're helping the adventurers make sure that they can go through without taking lightning damage on that kind of a level. And you can have that kind of a scenario where the crafters get involved with the environment itself as to how to neutralize things, how to work on certain areas, and allow them to go out into the area. And they can also enhance the materials that are gathered within that area by speed gathered or by material qualities gathered as well, because they may be having some sort of a expert addition to that area as well. Things like that. I think they can easily be involved that way.
That'd be actually pretty cool to see, where you could actually affect the climate that's basically affecting the area that you're in. There's going to be extreme climates out there. We all know that. This is, aside from the acclamation, we've seen some of these climates, how they work. They can have crafters actually disable those things temporarily, for instance, to make it easy accessible. Maybe these climates affect how the lands work. That you can't harvest. There's nodes in that area, but they can't be harvested because the climate's affecting it. So the crafters have to go and first disable it, and then they can go out and gather the harvestable nodes. That's definitely a cool idea, actually, and definitely things that they could do. Obviously, this would require a lot of work from VR because these are things that they would have to get involved in, real life timed events and everything like that, and you put that in play. But Lex, from your design, from a designer standpoint, those should be things that are doable, correct?
Yeah. Takes some work, but yeah.
Cool. So one other thing we should hit on when we're talking about progressing as a crafter and getting involved in the world, during the dev roundtable, Corey kind of dropped a bombshell on us, and he said that originally the team had been thinking about something pretty similar to what we're used to, where there are different crafting professions, and as you craft items or do writs for NPCs, you gain experience in that crafting profession, and that profession is something like tailor or leather worker or blacksmith or whatever. But he actually said that he was looking, investigating, maybe doing something completely different and going with sort of a more skill-based system for crafting progression, where you might earn points through some mechanism and then put those points into whatever skills you wanted. What do you guys think? I'm interested in actually what the whole community thinks. Like, what's appropriate for Pantheon? Is that skill-based thing appealing, or do we like the more class-based sort of profession system?
The skill-based system I would see working with, you take a tailor. I'm a tailor. That's the arc crafting profession that I've taken. But now I pick either leather or cloth. That's my mastery that I've taken. That's why I can see a skill system working. Because if you add skills to it generally from the get-go, where you have you still have these professions out there, but not in the sense that we know it, and you just put it onto you put points in here, put points in here. It's gonna kind of eliminate what crafting is all about. People pick a profession for multiple reasons, and it shouldn't. They shouldn't deviate from how it is. This is something they should look at closely to the real world. Right? If everything was that simple, we can just put skill points into it. Then why do we all go out and study and learn a certain profession? Why does everybody have some kind of speciality? Because you can't be it all. You have to pick something that you specialize in, and that's where I would take this. The skilling system I would go is as far as you pick your core profession. You reach your divide where you become like a blacksmith, or you become a weaponsmith or an armorsmith. Those are the two that you pick after you've gone from your blacksmithing, and that's where you can start using skill points, kind of specialize and strengthen certain areas within that profession that you pick. So, for instance, now Lex has taken weaponsmith. He now can add points into maybe two-handed swords, or axes, or daggers, or this, that, and the other, that give him certain benefits for those particular items that he's going to make. That's how I would kind of like to see it go. Well, that's why I think it personally would make sense to kind of do it that way, where you add a specialization on top of your specialization. That doesn't mean that all the other stuff that you're making is going to be crap or rubbish or useless. No, it's going to be based off of your experience, your crafting level. But you've got an extra bonus. For instance, now he might use lesser materials that way, or his effectiveness to make a pristine item or a quality item out of it is going to be heightened because he's put the skill points into a certain area of expertise that he's picked. So You have 1,000 armor smiths, weaponsmiths out there, but we all know that Lex is the one guy to go to make the two-handed swords. But he's specialized it a certain way, and put skill points a certain way. That's how I would see it making sense, and I think that would be a great way to do it, because that's something that hasn't really been done. You know, you have these typical professions, your archetype, then you take your normal profession, and then that's it, you're done. But, you know, actually specializing within the specialization, that's something that nobody's ever bothered to look at. And there are specializations within your profession. You know, I'm a wholesales representative, but my speciality is in marketing, for instance, right? Financial markets, you've got people that are, you know, they do the finances, but some might actually specialize in corporate financing. That's a specialization in its own. So why not do it something similar to that with the crafting in the game?
Yeah.
It would be interesting if, like, say you were a weaponsmith. You know, you can still do all your regular blacksmith stuff, but in terms of skills, it's not necessarily what you can customize, but what you can customize in what way. Because depending on, like, if you're going to do a skill point system, there's probably going to be a set number of skills. There's going to be some way to gain those skills, and you want them to retain a certain level of value. Otherwise, you run into that. Everyone, you can do everything. But what if it was like, you know, say, okay, I'm a weaponsmith. I make two-handed swords, but I make two-handed swords that are designed for, like, DPSers. So I try to make sure that there's lots of, you know, the physical stats on it. What if I can specialize into what I can create stat-wise on the weapon? Yeah. And through the creation process itself, maybe change the recipe a little bit here and there for whatever you want to do, and make the creation of an item a little more personal and a little more interactive.
Yeah, because it kind of makes for an interesting, you know, approach to this as well. But even though he's made that two-handed blade, for instance, that two-handed sword that's specialized on DPS, it's similar to what Landmark did, right? You had these your harvest tools. There were different specializations. You had harvest tools that had a bigger yield. You had harvest tools that were a lot faster, that they would you know, mash faster. So Lex has gone and created a DPS sword. But there's also maybe a specialization for a sword that has, you know, a harder hit. It's slower, but it hits a lot harder. You know, one that's for your tanks. That one, you know, just basically when they go in and taunt, they smack you. It gives you a bit of a shake. You know, you're knocked out. You're confused. Or you could have like CC. Add CC to a sword, for Christ's sake. You know, there's a 50% chance that when you smack that target and it crits, he's going to be bedazzled for 10 seconds.
You're going to have to spend an awful lot of time watching your log or just watching the graphics, because if that's a fast weapon, it crits and he's missed, and then you swing again, like say a double attack, and you just broke it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying though, but those are the kind of things that you could possibly add. You know, kind of like, you know, that's how you could, you know, specialize.
To me, it's one of those things where I think I'm not a crafter for a couple of reasons. The first one being the creation of items doesn't feel like I'm creating anything. It feels like I'm spawning items. It doesn't feel like I'm creating jack squat. I'm not learning anything, you know, and that's the whole point of being, say, a craftsman. You know, if I'm trying to learn carpentry, I learn different joints. I learn to use what tools where. I learn what certain things are. But with a lot of MMORPGs, you really don't learn anything. It's just you learn, oh, I need to gather this and this and this, and then click this button.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very flat, one-dimensional system that doesn't really take you on any type of journey. You know, and I get bored quickly. It feels so bleh. If you can specialize, or, you know, I mean, heck, do a quest to where you can become from a blacksmith to a weaponsmith, and then you unlock a specialization tree for that, and now all of a sudden you're still making hard decisions to help specialize what you can do, and you have to actually think about what you want to be able to do with your profession. Now, how to stop items feeling from just being click and spawn? I have a few ideas, but I don't know. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
I think that's a hard problem. Really,
certainly not easy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the middle of writing a post series on Pantheon Crafters right now about that very thing. But I think you have to start by saying, okay, is the act of creating an item, how do we make that actually look and feel like creating the item in game? And then how do you map the different buttons or whatever that crafters get to push to that process? That's not an easy problem.
What happens? No. What about going about it differently? Let's say, for instance, now creating a sword, for instance. It doesn't take you 30 seconds. It might take 3 days to make. What about doing it something like that? Give it actual meaning.
It would. I don't know what the right amount of time would be. But, like, say you go play EverQuest 2. You can gather whatever you need in one zone. You can go back to your guild hall or the crafting section of a town, click a few buttons, and you're done.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel rewarding. Sure, it's nice to have whatever item you were after, but how long do you feel attached to that item? When you create something and you put, some hard work into it in the real world, you tend to have a little bit of bias feeling towards that item. I built my computer from the ground up. So if something happens to this computer, I feel a little more upset than I would say for something from Walmart, because I spent the time putting it together, picking all the parts, wiring it, everything. I did everything for it. So of course I'm going to feel a little more connected or attached to it, I should say.
What about adding like an artificial time sink to it? So let's go and break down, for instance, making a freaking sword, right?
Yeah.
First off, you've got to melt the metals that you have, right? As an example. So that melting process has a time sink to it. It's not just you go to the forge, you take your items, you click a button, and you see the process go, and after 30 seconds you melted that iron. No. What happens if it actually does take a physical amount of time?
I'm all for stuff like that when it makes sense. Like, say you're smelting iron into ingot. It obviously takes time to heat it up. It obviously takes time to pour it into the bar mold or the ingot mold or whatever. It takes time to cool down. But it can't be so artificial feeling that you're sitting here wondering why you're wasting your time.
But what you could do is, though, this is kind of a way to bring the crafters also into the adventuring side of things as well. Let's say, for instance, now it takes you 30 minutes to melt that metal down into its ingot or whatever, right? As an example. You can use that 30 minutes to do something else. You go gathering, for instance. Or you go and take care of something else. You don't have to make
you can work on another part of whatever you're making.
On another part of what you're making. So basically, you go to the metal forge, you melt the iron. But now, you're going to go make the hilt for the handle itself.
There is kind of an intrinsic downside to this whole thing, though. If you're going to do a skill-based system like blacksmithing, your skill is 14 out of 200. How do you implement a system like that where you're not constantly creating garbage items? Because what you're essentially doing is spending a lot of time to create something that's essentially worthless to the game in any way, shape, or form. That
comes down to the what we said at the beginning, with easing people into it. So you pick your profession. You start off with a simple task of making the hilt, or melting down the irons that you've collected. And as you're doing that, you're skilling yourself up. You're becoming better at making, melting down the iron. You're becoming better at strapping the hilt.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously you got the end product as well. When you're hammering it down and putting it all together, you're getting, you know, that's basically where you get an additional skill points, because now you're actually, you know, putting the sword together. That's how you kind of do it. You break it down into steps, and each step adds. So you have your blacksmithing. That's your top tier. That's what you're skilling up. But underneath that, you have the individual steps that you skill up individually. For each process that you're doing, melting down the ingot, snapping the hilt, this, that, and the other.
Yeah, the only thought that came to me was that every step would give you a point, then you would get a larger amount of points should you successfully put everything together, or at least a chance to get a larger skill up.
Exactly. That's a way of doing it, for instance.
As long as it's fun. I mean, that's the important thing.
Right, and that's another hard part. What's fun for one person isn't fun for another. I would have fun in a crafting system where I'm actually hammering the sword blade. I would have fun actually trying to figure out how long I've got to heat this. You know, that to me is fun because I'm learning. You know, but that doesn't mean Josh would find that fun. He might find that horribly annoying.
He might find it annoying, but if you think about it, right, all these classes in the adventuring side of things all have different spells. You learn new spells and everything. Why not add a system like that to the crafters, like Lex just said? You know, you have maybe you know we gain spells and things that we can use for our profession that can be upgraded or better and everything. Give us a leveling system as well, where you're actually hitting that sword. So Josh is hitting that sword down to forge it into its shape. He's got it. You know, he's got the first level spell. But he's now got better, he's leveled up and everything, he's now gained some experience, he now gets the next one. That actually helps towards his
and halves the time to actually make that.
The time of making that item.
Yeah.
It gives him additional skill points, leveling up. So those are the things that they could possibly do.
Yeah, Nev, since you're probably got more of the crafter insight out of everybody here. The system I explained, or that I briefly went over, but like, you know, hammering the blade, having to heat it up and know when it's hot enough. Is this something that you think would be on the majority frowned upon?
No, I mean, I think it comes down to what Josh said, right? How do you make it fun? Mm-hmm. If you look at, like, if you go out right now and you look at a lot of single player RPGs out there that have crafting systems built into that, they're doing things like that, right? Where you have to hammer on the right spot on the bar to hammer the blade out, or you have to, you know, temperature within a certain range to smelt the iron or whatever. So there's no reason that you can't do that in an MMO and people will still enjoy it. I think there's two really big concerns that you have to do. First of all, you need to make sure that the process is interactive enough that it doesn't feel tedious. It's like, you know, in simple terms, you have to give the crafter buttons to push to influence what's happening.
Right.
You know, and I think Yarnala had a good point about, I call them techniques, but, you know, as the crafter progresses, as they get better at their trade, maybe they learn more advanced techniques that allow them to influence that crafting process even more, maybe make it faster or reach better heights of quality or whatever.
I've got a good way to make it interesting, though. I just have it. Why not add real life towards it, right? And take certain things when you're melting down iron, where if you overheat it, you actually get a little notification based on real life that, hey, iron has to be melted and kept constantly at 900 degrees. For instance, actually give people some thoughtful insight into the real life side of things. So kind of like a little hinting system, some factual input.
The reason I say that one, I don't get into crafting because I'm not learning anything, is because when you take up a craft, you learn. You feel good about gaining this knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I think, at least for me, that's what's missing in MMO crafting, is I don't feel like I'm gaining. When I'm a blacksmith in the game, I don't feel like I'm a blacksmith. I just feel like I'm a guy who can click this specific button.
Yeah.
I think the other challenge that you have is... Oh, sorry, Josh. Give me just a sec. The other challenge that we have is we have to keep in mind that there's this whole other adventuring side of the game where people have classes and levels. And so, like, to use the example of the two-handed sword, you're going to have a guy at level 10 using a two-handed sword, and then a guy at level 30 using a two-handed sword. and you somehow want your crafting progression to sort of map to that adventuring progression in some way. So if crafters can't create two-handed swords until they're very advanced, that doesn't quite work for the adventuring side of the game. So that's the other challenge we have to think about too.
True,
right, it is.
And let's take your 200 sword as an example. Yeah, you can go up as a fighter and gain experience and do 2 attacks per round, or do multiple attacks at one point. But if you crafted a crystal sword of a very high level crafter itself, you might be able to do 3 types of swings within that period, and therefore making things a lot better. And you can then incorporate the crafting into the adventuring side of things as well in improving things.
You could also like Neff just said, right? Let's say they do put restrictions on it. At level 30, you start to learn how to do two-handed swords. It makes no sense to do that. Sorry, right? Why shouldn't the crafter be able to do that from the get-go? People.
Well, think about it. Think about life. Someone who is a blacksmith can technically try to make a sword. Now, he may make a sword, but it's probably going to be low quality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think another thing that would help is that if you made like the base or trade something that was still viable throughout the entire process of the game. Like maybe I don't want to become an armorer or I don't want to become a weaponsmith. I want to just be a blacksmith.
Yeah.
Is if there's a way that I can continue to be a blacksmith. I mean, it's fine that Josh wants to be an armorer. It's fine that Yarn wants to be a weaponsmith. That's cool. I'm a blacksmith, and we all have our own little place in the crafting world, But that's not to say that Yarn didn't start off as a blacksmith, and we're both making two-handed swords. It's just that when he decides, hey, I want to just focus on weapons, that's when his swords start getting a heck of a lot better than mine.
Exactly.
Correct. And I think if you specialize in being a swordsmith, ultimately, you should stop getting maybe armor patterns and things like that past a certain point, because ultimately the things that you're going to make as an armor smith, as Lexa rightly says, it's going to be crap quality. It's not going to be worthwhile even giving it to an adventurer to go out and swing a sword with. So rather just specialize in what you know.
Yeah, definitely. It would be great to see that happen, where
you
can actually specialize, because that opens up a whole new market as well, a whole new sphere for crafting. You've got people out there that are physically specialized in two-handed swords or two-handed spears, or long swords, or in long bows, short bows, crossbows, wooden shields, round shields, tower shields, you name it. You have people actually specialize in all these different areas. It doesn't necessarily mean that every other person out there that does these trades or specialize in something different, or like Lex said, stayed a blacksmith, makes lesser quality. It might take him a lot longer to make that, for instance.
But I can make more general purpose items that can help other crafters.
Exactly.
You might even make general items that I, as a specialized person, need.
Right.
You're the blacksmith. Your generalized items.
Hey, I need some rivets. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Things like that. That's how you kind of bring it all into fruition. Because that's the one thing that's always going to be a big problem in these games, be it the adventuring side of things or the crafting side of things. There's always that flavor of the month. There's always that that perfect class, that perfect choice to pick. That's the better that's a better crafter to choose from this standpoint.
Which is rubbish.
And certain crafting professions start to die down, or certain classes start to die down. It's rubbish. It is absolute rubbish. Why should somebody's choice of profession or choice of class be of less value all of a sudden? Everybody's choice should have meaning. Period. They should all have value, and that would, add that effect, because you wouldn't know what's the best profession to pick by, because hey, guess what? I've specialised in two-handed swords. Josh has specialised in two-handed swords, and so is Lexa. But the difference being, Lexa's skilled for DPS, Josh is skilled for longevity, and I've skilled just for raw power. Does it make my sword less better than Josh's or Lexa's? No, it's a personal preference situation now. What do I prefer to have? Do I prefer to have more DPS? Do I prefer to have one that gives you one hell of a smack? Or do I prefer to have a sword that lasts longer than the other two, for instance?
Right. Because see, I've always kind of looked at it like a lot of people play MMORPGs. At least they start off because they want that feeling of being an adventurer. We want to go into a new world. We want to get lost and just have experiences. So if I wanted to play an MMO, join a virtual world, if I wanted to join a virtual world, but I wanted to be a blacksmith, why should that be any less important than Yarn who wants to be an adventurer? Why is it that because my tastes are a little different that I always get the short end of the design stick?
Exactly.
It's MMOR, role play. Role play is not explicit to adventuring. Role play can be anything inside an MMO. I can be somebody who role plays a crafter. I can be somebody who role plays a certain profession. I can be somebody who role plays a certain race, a certain class, a certain character. Role play is called MMO, role playing game.
And Texan, sorry, I can't talk today, goes a step further on what we said in the past. What if you had the ability to specialize in a visual style? So I can make short swords I can make two-handed swords that have dwarf runic writings on them.
You make short swords as well, don't worry, Lex.
I know. I was just trying to stay consistent. But Yarn can make them that have Darkmere writing along the blade.
Yeah. But
and we all know that looks are far more important than stats. So absolutely.
Amen. Preach it, brother.
I mean, look at it, right? Look at the games we are playing nowadays. There is a huge outcry for the creativeness of games. A lot of people play survival games because they love the building aspect of it. They love the creativeness, being able to create stuff and try and survive out in the world. A lot of people are addicted to Minecraft. Crafting isn't something that is, second pillar to any other game. A lot of us play all these games because we enjoy that aspect of it. Now, obviously, it's a different style of game, but, that's where you have to take inspiration from, though. These games are hugely successful for the crafting aspect of their games. So there is definitely an interest there for crafting to mean something more than just clicking a damn button and leveling up to max level in a matter of a week over, 5 months in adventuring. Why should it only take me a week to level up in crafting?
So one of the things that we've kind of been circling around here is the topic of itemization and meaningful choices. If you guys remember all the Visionary Realms tenets for Pantheon, meaningful choice is something that they really want to do. And I think that applies to the items that you use as an adventurer just as much as it applies to any other aspect of your character progression. How do you reflect that in the crafting system? How do you make it so that the crystal sword isn't the best sword in the game, for example? How do you, like Yarn, you were using examples of having different emphasis where maybe one sword does more damage, but it's slower. How do you do that in a way that really gives those adventurers that meaningful choice that we want to do?
That's definitely, it's a very tricky...
What I would do? Diving into the specializations, being able to put certain stats on certain weapons so that you can cater to your audience or the audience you want to cater to. Say Yarn and I both make a crystal sword. Well, I'm going to make mine for a DPSer, so it's going to have strength, it's going to have dex or agility or a combination thereof. or maybe I find something that sacrifices the amount of stats I could put on it to increase the damage ratio. Where maybe Yarn makes one for a tank that he's focusing on agility and stamina, and he actually sacrifices some of that damage ratio to add more stamina.
Thing is, though, right? That's one side of the pillar. The game has to be designed from the devs that way as well. That means they have to take that into consideration, and that's something we've been preaching all the time. It shouldn't really matter what class you play, how you play it. Right? It's personal preference. There should be obviously slight limitations, right? I can't pick a healer and then become an awesome DPSer, right? There should be certain limitations as to what I can do as a healer. I might be able to focus on the group healing aspect of things, or if I've got a healer that has, a lot of utility, I can specialize in the utility side of things, or even the healing side of things, where it technically doesn't make sense for me to do that because I'm a utility healer, but through the specialization, it makes me beneficial. It gives me benefits to the group that that you wouldn't normally have, and those are the kind of things that has to be looked at when they talk about itemization, how to make it feel valuable and everything. That's another pillar of things. They want to do something like that, they have to look away from the whole stat picture, and when they have all these items that drop, the best in slot, they have to disregard that completely. Let people choose how they want to stat them. Obviously, you're going to have stats that are going to have your benefits, like wisdom for the healers and stamina for your health and everything. But they shouldn't be so focused in depth on those, so that Lex's suggestion comes into fruition. I could still be a cleric that has my normal stats on, but I could still utilize that sword from Lexa that has DPS on it. If just as a stupid example, let's say it's not a sword, it's a mace, a two-handed mace that he's made. It's now got DPS stats on it. Why shouldn't I be able to utilize that as a cleric? Because I'm a healer? It gives me some kind of benefit somewhere. All the stats are meant to matter, so make them matter, regardless of my stance in the world with my class being a healer.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I don't think there should be a problem using a mace with DPS on it. However, you're going to be doing crap damage ultimately, because you just don't know how to swing a mace properly compared to a fighter or whatever the case may be.
Exactly.
It's just like you're in your character. If say you're a wizard. Wizards rely heavily on int. If you go heavy into dex, you're probably not going to go boom boom so well.
Yeah.
No, but then
the person at fault is nobody but the player.
Yeah, of course.
Because that's the thing you got to look at as well. Your solution is definitely absolutely right, Lex, but that has to be considered in the design aspect from the game, from the core down. They can't put these hard limits on the class choices, on the class stats and everything. They would have to basically give a lot more freedom for that to work from the crafting side of things.
I do think that it could be a situation where certain materials may have natural affinities towards certain bonuses on items. So certain metals that you might have might be able to be stronger ultimately and do slightly more damage.
Metal in general, it doesn't matter what it is. All metal should matter. It doesn't matter if it's tier 1 or tier 5. At tier 5, that tier 1 metal should still hold its value.
Period. #me too. All metal should matter.
That's something that's always boggled me, right? Look at the real world. Aluminium is used everywhere, right? It's used everywhere. Then you have steel. It's used less. It's used more for this side of things. But all these metals still hold value. Copper still holds value. Tin still holds value.
Yeah, but you swing a tin sword versus you swing adamantium sword.
But you could use the tin still to add an additional effect to the adamantium sword.
Well, in the case of metal, what if the adamantium is an alloy of tin and several other things?
Sure.
See,
exactly.
that brings up another point. Like, Neff, what if people, or sorry, crafters, had the ability to experiment and actually try to create their own alloys? To me, I think I'd be screaming like a schoolgirl, like, "Oh my god, this is cool!" But again, I'm not much of a crafter, so I don't know how well it will go over in the general populace.
That was actually something that they, come back to my example of Landmark. That's how Landmark did it, right? You would create this. You would have your picks, for instance. One pick was made with tin, iron, and copper. The other one was made with tin, copper, and mithril, and they had different effects depending on how it was mixed up. They had different effects on it, and one would yield bigger, one would yield. That's how you could kind of do it with the alloy system. Depending on how you mix them up, they have different outcomes on how they're going to influence the item you're going to be making. Or come up with something, because don't forget we have experimenting. That's something that you'll be able to do in Pantheon. You'll be able to experiment. So why not go completely wild?
I mean, mathematically, there's no reason you couldn't do something like that. It would just take a system on the back end to represent the different properties of the items. I think the difficulty, again, comes just down to the itemization strategy. Like, how do you ensure that all those different properties matter so that it is a meaningful choice for the adventurer?
Yeah. That is certainly a challenge. But that also brings up another idea. What if you got rid of the traditional idea of recipes and instead almost added like a self-recording recipe book? Like, if you as an adventurer have a record of all the quests you've ever done. Say as a crafter, you're adventuring, you come across some books, you find one that's clickable, you read it, and it's actually telling you how you can make some crazy alloy, or how you can make some sword out of crystal, because obviously not a lot of people do that. And then instead of having to click on a recipe and you just know it forever, it goes in another like interface that is like a log that you can refer to. So you're actually feeling like you're sitting at your workbench, you got your little book open, you're going over everything, and then as you do it more and more, you got to look at it less, and then you feel like you know these recipes because you're a blacksmith or whatever you want to do.
And then you can also add in the fact then that comes to the factor of like let's go and look at some cooking lessons right now. Pancakes, right? There's so many ways to make pancakes, but you can opt out a certain material. So some people put mineral water in their pancakes to make them nice and fluffy. Some people use fat milk.
Gasoline.
So you could do that with what you're suggesting there, Lex.
Yeah.
You opt out a certain element, and then
to me,
voila.
it just feels like if people like sculptors are artists, technically carpenters are too. When they create, say, a just stunning piece of work, that's art. Just because they're a crafter doesn't mean they can't make art. So why not give them the freedom to try and create instead of just sticking them within a narrow margin? I know it's a lot more work, but is that work not worth it? I'll take your silence as a no.
No, I'm not even, because I would say yeah. I'm all about buddy.
The answer is an opinion. It is not definitive. Yeah. What might be yes for you could be a no for somebody else.
So that gets into something else that we should probably talk about. I mean, everything that we've talked about is pure awesomeness for dedicated crafters, for people that really, really have time to devote to the system. But how do we also make it fun for maybe the person that doesn't have that much time to devote? Maybe they just want to dabble in things. How do you make it so that there's not like a barrier to entry, if you will, that prevents people from getting involved in crafting?
Well, the thing is,
It's a
I
toughie.
think we're asking the wrong questions, though, to be honest. Right? Why should we have to do that?
Yeah, that's exactly my
Because,
point as well.
excuse me, Pantheon from the get-go is going to be challenging. It's not going to be everybody's game. Not everybody's going to be able to spend 8 hours doing the adventuring side of things, right? But there's still going to be, you're still going to feel accomplished within a 2-hour session of playing Pantheon. So, crafters, regardless of what you are or what you're interested in, you know, you're going to still feel an accomplishment. But, you know, catering to try and open it up to everybody, it's not everybody's game. It's like a lot of people that craft in games don't like the adventuring side of things. They've only spent the crafting side of the aspect in it. A lot of people don't like raiding, or you know, or can't do the raiding because they're not good enough, or this, that, and the other, or don't like doing the dungeons and stuff like that. If we start kind of catering to everybody's needs and trying to bring in I mean, yes, it's great to try and bring outsiders in, but the question we should be asking is, you know, it should be looked at from a crafter standpoint, from the devoted crafter. Because this is what it's about at the end of the day. It's the devoted crafter that's looking for a devoted crafting system. It's not the guy who wants to have a sneak peek at crafting and see if it's interesting for him. It's the crafter that's devoted. The crafters are the ones that want to have a devotion in an MMO. They want to feel at home in an MMO and feel that their crafting has meaning in that game that they're playing. And it's not just focused on the adventurers. I think we're asking the wrong question there. You know, how do we bring in other people? Because so it should be, you know, looking at the hardcore players, the hardcore crafters, because that's where the lack comes from. That's where they failed in many occasions.
Yeah, I take Bjorn's point. I would still have the system where you ease people into it initially, so that they either can decide whether crafting is for them or not. But I certainly wouldn't want to give somebody that comes and crafts for 1 or 2 hours a week the ultimate rewards for crafting versus somebody that is going to craft 6 hours a day type of thing.
I think
at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to just the experience of doing the task. Because, like, say someone doesn't have a lot of time to play, like maybe 2 hours a week. Like, I don't know their life, so we'll just say they have 2 hours a week. Pantheon's run. Their goal is to give someone a meaningful experience in just a couple hours. So if adventuring can do that, granted, it might, I don't know, to some it might be considered a little easier of a task, some it might be harder. But if you can do that with adventuring, there's no reason you can't craft it, because it's not about what the goal at the end of the tunnel is. It's the passage through the tunnel that matters. You know, it's what you're doing. If it's fun and enjoyable, then, you know, obviously you're going to have a fun time.
Exactly, you know, because everybody's got their preference. People like PvP, people like PvE, people like RP. People like single-player games, FPSs, RTSs, you name it. We all have our preferences, our joys, our mislikes.
Hentai, manga.
Right? So, you know, it's the same with crafting. You know, make crafting meaningful in an MMO, and it's not going to be for everybody. Not everybody's going to have the time to invest. There's not, and again, you're not going to have a lot of people that are going to be completely fulfilling, that do everything. They take 100% the adventuring stuff, they take 100% the crafting stuff. You're going to have people that only concentrate on adventuring. You have people that only concentrate on crafting. You have people that concentrate on both. You have people that are going to be like, you know, not so much this, but more that.
I'm an all over the board player. It all depends on if I woke up on the right side of the bed, if the winds are blowing the right direction, and the random no, that's a good day, or the random static in my head if there's a certain tone. All that depends on if I'm having a good day or not. And when I go to play a game, if I'm having a bad day, You know, I might not want to adventure. I might want to just sit and craft. I might want to go PvP and take my aggression out on someone else so that I know someone else is having a bad day too. I might want to just run around and gather. I might want to quest. You know, sky is the limit.
What about
But
adding?
I'm different from day to day.
What about adding in,
So-
like, you know, what I mentioned earlier on, though, Lex? What about adding in, a helper, a crafting helper? You don't necessarily want to be a big, massive crafter, and Lex has disappeared now because he's afraid of all this. I mentioned earlier on, maybe
Discord, fix your damn Linux client.
becoming a master crafter and then opening up a shop and being somebody that can teach other crafters early on. What about having something like that similar for those that necessarily do not want to get all into the crafting, but hey, Lex has had one of those days where he doesn't want to go and do the adventuring. He's not really into the crafting, but hey, he'll go to Yarn and he'll be able to clink into Yarn's crafting and help him out somehow.
Yeah. If crafters had their own space, because I mean, you could merge it into their housing or whatever. But if I could go to another crafter and be like, I'm just having a rough day, can I help you out? And Yarn says, yeah, I need a whole bunch of rivets or I need a whole bunch of nails to do something. You take here's the ore, you go over here to smelt it down, you go over here to make the nails, and let me know when you're done. I can still walk away from that most likely in a better mood.
Like, you open up a group, we're now grouped, we both get experience from it. He's doing the nails, I'm doing the other stuff, we both get experience from it. Boom. We're both happy, he's progressing,
but
I'm progressing at a faster pace.
It's another mirror image situation here.
Mm-hmm.
If the adventuring side can mentor someone lower, or mentor to somebody to play with them, I don't see why a crafter shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be a one-to-one comparison because it has to fit that situation. Obviously, your level doesn't matter. Maybe it's your skill that matters.
Yeah.
How do you merge the gap between that disparity if someone's like, oh, I've never blacksmithed before, but this guy's all he does is sit around a forge and sweat his butt off. That's going to take a little bit of creative brainstorming to figure out, but I don't see why you can't treat that side like the other side.
Yeah.
Cool. So, what do you guys? Let's change gears a little bit because I think we've kind of talked about everything related to progressing as a crafter that we can. But some people get into crafting because they really just enjoy making items or making items for other people or for themselves. Others get into it because they really want to earn money. Maybe they're going out and harvesting resources, which I include as part of crafting, and they're selling those resources on the market. Or maybe they're trying to make suits of armor to sell to adventurers. So when it comes to selling stuff and facilitating the economy in the game, there's been a lot of discussion around what's the best way to do that. Should we go with like a global auction house or a regional auction house or something else, or maybe just forget all that, go back to EQ and do the EC tunnel? How are we feeling about that these days?
I think we should go back to the old days. I'll give you 2 goats for 1 ingot.
You are not selling me for metal again.
It's definitely it's really a tricky one.
This one especially.
People despise, a lot of people at least despise the global auction house. But it
some
does
people
have
love
it. Some people do love it, and it does. It has its value, it has its merit, it has its reasons behind it. I, for one, I'm all for having local auction houses, but that does not mean that we can't have something later on down the road where we have maybe something global. So, for instance, first off, you start locally, then you start opening up trade routes between the individual cities. You have to, those are physically something that has to be done. Then you have to build up like outposts to protect these trade routes and everything. That's where the crafters come in again and do something outside of the town. They help build these these outposts. They help, forge these trade routes, contracts and everything, and and whatnot. The adventurers also get their hand in it by help protecting the carts that go back and forth, things like that. And when there's attacks and the outposts get destroyed, crafters get involved again. But that could ultimately lead to a global auction house. And we've actually did we talk about this already or did we not? I do not remember if we talked about the gnomes and their skyhold as the only place to have like a global auction house. I don't know if we did a show about that or if this was...
Dude, this is our 164th show. I don't remember what the hell we did last week.
We talked about something like, what if the gnomes were the only place where you could have a global auction house? But you still have your local auction houses or your local trades.
Oh, that's right. Because I guess we're assuming it's a floating city and it can travel.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a mobile city, so thereby its local auction house would technically be mobile. It's an interesting concept. It's almost like a 2-tier system. But would something like that only encourage people to stay at the gnome city?
Yeah, but you're obviously gonna add higher costs.
Well, yeah.
Things like that. There's definitely going to be a higher taxation, this, that, and the other. And you could also add in, when you have like local auction houses, you could add in a global market. So let's say, for instance, now there's a high demand for iron ingots in Thronefast, but you only get them in the region of the Halfling City, or the Halfling area, right? So there's going to be a higher demand for those things to reach our local market. So you could add a fictional market behind the player market as well, where the cities get involved and have demands of their own. That is, basically controlled by VR, because that's another thing that they're worried about. How do you keep the values real, the values worth it? How do you keep things from not, from demonetizing themselves, becoming absolutely obsolete and everything? You want to keep things at value at some point. And that's where VR could come in and create their own system behind our player system that also influences us when we're doing things out in the world, harvesting, selling stuff, trading stuff. They could have so all of a sudden you get a lot more money in Thronefast for iron ingot than you do in the local area where it's normally from. Because there's a high demand in Thronefast right now in the human region for this.
If what I'm going to say, do you mean VR would have the ability to create artificial supply and demand issues?
Yeah.
That's kind of what happened with the Beanie Babies.
The what?
Beanie Babies.
What's that?
People, they're little like stuffed animals. What the company, they're big in the U.S. Like, God, when was that? I don't know.
Was it the 90s?
Yeah. They were highly collectible, but what they did was the company would ship like 5 of one specific one on the West Coast with 20 of this other one. And then they'd turn that around and do it on the East Coast, creating artificial rarities. And then certain ones they would only ship to EU, which again made things seem ultra rare, even though the same number of them were out there. And in the end, that backfired. Not saying it would for VR, I'm just saying in that specific instance, that backfired.
It wouldn't be like that though, would it? It's slightly different.
No, I'm just saying when you play with supply and demand, you have to be very, very careful because it can bite you in the backside.
Oh,
quickly.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, and this is just my personal opinion, but I feel like the pitfall that we always fall into when we talk about economic systems is we always try to land on one system that does everything, right? We're going to have a global auction house and it's going to handle everything, every kind of item, and everything that players want to buy or sell, and that's great until it's not. And maybe the right thing to do for Pantheon is to think about, let's look at the different sorts of things that are being traded by players, and let's build systems multiple systems that are appropriate to different categories of items. So maybe you have an auction house type system for your commodities, right? You know, Yarn is buying leather hides because he's buying wolf pelts because he wants to make a bunch of leather armor. Cool. That stuff is probably great for an auction house type system, right? Because he needs a lot of it. But Josh goes and makes this really nice crystal sword. He probably doesn't really need an auction house to sell that, right? And probably the fee for selling that thing on the auction house would be really high. Maybe he needs a different way to sell that crystal sword that is a little more tailored to its value. So, whenever I talk about this,
he brings it to a pawn shop. Exactly. So whenever I talk about this problem, it's always I hear people go, say, "Oh, global auction houses are bad because," or direct trading is bad because. Well, why can't we actually allow multiple ways to coexist? Right, so I've got a question for Rex, right? Wouldn't this actually be the best example of bringing a blockchain? Kind of.
No.
Control?
That's no. The thing with blockchain is that you can make items incredibly unique. They can actually have their own identities and have a history. That's one of the big reasons for doing blockchain on an item, because you can literally trace its lineage.
What I'm getting at basically is because it's us, the players at the end of the day, that artificially make these prices.
Mm-hmm.
It's us that do that. But let's say we have a stock exchange that is, at the end of the day, a system behind the marketplaces that actually control what we can and cannot do with the items we put out there. If there's all of a sudden a high influx of leather pelts going into the auction house at, City X or Global Market, for instance, there has to be some kind of system, because it's done in the real world as well. Prices can be controlled. Demand can be controlled.
Right.
So
let's assume for a minute that there's a local shop that has 15 crystal swords. The server that handles that town I'm assuming servers are going to be cut up and handled in zones, which is probably incorrect, but you would look at that town and say, hey, there's 15 crystal swords. They're not really that valuable anymore, right? It's not to say they're not good. It's just to say that it's not valuable anymore. So maybe you could suggest a price based upon the prices in the area, but I'm not an economics major. I'm just a guy who likes to code weird crap. Is there probably a better solution? Oh yeah, definitely. Do I have the answer? No.
Well, I think to some extent, too, players can do for themselves what Yarnell is suggesting. Like, if that shop in Thronefast has 15 crystal swords, maybe there's a way for that player smith to find out that, the shop in Fairthale only has 2.
Right.
And is that worth the trip to Fairthale to put the sword in that shop instead? So to some extent, I think you can leave that stuff up to players, and you don't have to necessarily artificially create supply or demand situations. The one place where I can see it happening, though, and this is something that plagues almost every MMO out there, is that we tie the advancement of crafting to creating items. So you're incentivizing crafters to go create lots and lots and lots of items in order to progress, right? Well, then they try to sell all those items at the same time, and now all of a sudden you have a massive oversupply situation on your market and prices plummet.
Yeah. So basically, there needs to be a way to get items out of the world.
I'm just thinking. Yeah, I was just thinking though that say now there was just one auction house in the world, okay, that you could actually go to, or maybe 1 or 2 auction houses. If you could say now that you had the crystal sword to sell, but you were nowhere close to an auction house, you could actually sell it to the city for a standard fee type thing, And then they could put it on the market at the end of the day to ensure that that sword reaches all the people type of thing.
Yeah, just maybe touch back on what Neff said though, and to touch on what you said, Josh. Right? There's actually even a way to go around the artificial supply and demand. It's common sense that if all of a sudden, right, all these tailors are making all these bags, these 8-slot bags all of a sudden, and they all come to the auction house to put them up, at some point there's going to be absolutely no supply needs anymore.
No.
So what happens, the auction house now goes, right, boom, we're going to stop taking them, or if you absolutely want to put your goods up in our auction house right now, we're going to tax you more. You're going to think twice about selling that item. That's how supply and demand works. All of a sudden, you've got 500 bags wanting to go up onto the auction house. Hello? We've reached how much we can actually take on. That is actually even going to, be worth it.
That is actually quite a dilemma, though.
What?
No. I'm not talking about yours. I totally agree with what you're saying. But the bags, what you mentioned about bags, that is the biggest dilemma in any MMO. Is how do you make something that is craftable like that not become useless?
Well, bags and
over time. They are. If everybody has the same slot bag over time, how are you ever going to sell more bags?
Well, the next expansion comes out, you get the next bigger case.
No, but I'm just saying, you're sitting with 6 months of not being able to use your crafter because.
Not only that, but consider, like Yaron, you said the next expansion comes out and now everybody's making the bigger bags. Yeah. Well, great. That means everybody's buying the bigger bags. But what about that guy who just bought the game and he's just starting to learn? He can't make the bigger bags yet. What does he do?
Well, you make a smaller bag, doesn't he?
And he sells it to.
He sells it to
the person who can't afford the big ones.
He sells it within, because basically the biggest problem is what I see in these MMOs is when you look at the NPCs that have goods out there, wares out there, nobody ever buys them because they're ridiculously stupid. They've got no stats on them. They're twice as much as what a freaking green-coloured sword would cost, and that's the biggest problem. That these artificial NPCs with artificial wares have ridiculous items to sell in the first place, right? So the lower the lower crafter that's coming in to sell to make bags, he doesn't have a use for them. He can't or people don't have a use for them anymore. Well, what about if he puts those bags up on the auction house, and now me as a tailor, for instance, can actually revert that bag into a raw material again that has use, because that's what it comes down to. The way they've leveled up, how we level up in MMOs with crafting is all the mats become useless from tier to tier. That's what we were talking about earlier on. Why should mats become useless just because it's tier 1? Maybe I still have a value for that cloth bag at a T5 situation. So maybe I can take a cloth bag and
there's the solution.
Bring down the cloth.
There's the solution.
And now I can use that cloth in a T5 recipe. I basically revert the bag from its its creativeness into its raw material again, and use that for something different now. But
I was just saying that is the solution ultimately. That bags should have a not a breakable, but a life limit, so to speak. So that they are going to degrade over time, and you're going to have to buy bags to make sure that they don't break while you're on adventures and you can't hold stuff.
That would actually be a pretty cool mechanic to see when you're engaging, actually from an adventuring standpoint. You're engaging with an encounter, and the encounters have a chance to damage your bag.
Yeah. Or it just wears out over time of constantly rubbing against donkeys and.
What happens to my items in the bag?
Well, you could be really harsh and say that you lose them. They start, your coin starts dropping out of your bag. Now you're a few plat lighter. It depends how extreme you want to go. On a PvP server, you might be able to, you could add that element to it. That's the environment affecting you there.
I'd rather get a prostate exam by Edward Scissorhands on meth.
But you could basically just have it like you have a certain time frame now to replace that bag.
Yeah, a common bag might take for instance, might last 15 days. An enchanted bag might last 2 months, type of a thing, based on the material that's used. So yeah, it could definitely work that way.
And then you have a need for crafters actually in your group. Hey, my bag's torn. Oh,
patch it up.
Jan will get the needle and thread, and I'll stitch that up for you. I'll patch that up for you. It now adds another day or two to your bag's life.
So you can make it back to town.
There you go.
Yeah, and then once you get back to town, you can buy a new bag from somebody. So that would work.
And that way, old and new can exist.
You could do that.
Alternatively,
in theory, you could. Oh, go ahead.
if you have a tailor in your Group, maybe they could do like a quick repair for you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'll slap some flex tape on your bag.
Exactly, like do like a little duct tape.
Duct tape fixes everything.
See, TechSank says that, or he suggested, if instead of losing items, you could have them mailed to you.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I'd be okay with that. It's the whole if I'm carrying stuff and I neglect to be the alert or something. I know.
Just taking the mic, right?
I know.
It's obviously for certain servers they could possibly do that. PvP servers, because in PvP people can steal your stuff. They can gorge you. They can nick your stuff and everything. So why technically if you have your bag torn, you might lose some bits. Obviously on the PvE.
I'm gonna go to a blacksmith and have him make me a metal box.
Oh yeah, that's one thing I really despise in EverQuest 2. I mean, I utilised it, I loved it, but hey, guess what? I'm walking around.
I'm sure there's 4 items
with 4 massive chests with 32 storage, right? That weigh 100 freaking kilos a piece. I've got 6 of them on me though, because I'm awesome.
That's because you're a hero.
Exactly. It's like,
To be fair, when EQ2 launched, weight mattered a lot more than it did. I forget when they patched that out. But
Everything mattered more in EverQuest 2 when it launched.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good lesson that Pantheon should learn, not just from EQ2, but from every other MMO. It's like, if you start off with something really mattering, don't go and nerf it into oblivion in an expansion.
What about
I agree.
Let's quickly go and bounce on the weight situation for it. Right? Now, weight should matter, yes. But should you be artificially limited forever? No. You should be able to counteract against that. It's like going to the military, right? You start off with a certain weight class, and then you carry more. You get more weight, so you get used to it and everything. And that's what I would love to see Pantheon do. Every class has a certain limitation on what they can carry, depending on what they are and everything. But that doesn't mean you're locked to that. You can actually go out and physically train to carry more on you. Have that skill based as well.
Wouldn't it be, rather than doing it on a class by class basis, what if you just tied it to, say, strength?
Yeah.
And if you wanted to carry more, then put on some more strength gear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think that goes back to what we were talking about giving people meaningful choices and having different stats matter. Why would your cleric want strength?
Exactly.
Well, maybe they want to be able to carry.
But, suddenly now, even for a cleric or a wizard, strength matters.
Well, yeah, it should matter anyway. But the problem is here that you have though is now all of a sudden your cleric's not going to be as effective in healing because he's missing points somewhere. No, scrap that idea. Why does that have to necessarily be the case? There should be skill added towards this as well. It's like with weaponry. I don't want to be able to pick up a frickin' mace or a sword and I'm the superhero with this mace. It's gonna, you know, I have to level that up. I have to learn the technique to use that mace effectively. So WoW had, you know, you could learn different skills for different weapons, and you had to learn to master. The way it was done was poorly, but you know, I would love to see it where me using a mace or using a two-hand mace is going to be completely different. I'm going to have to learn how to do that. That means I would love to see it if I've started off with a one-hand mace, I've mastered that, and now go to two-handed for whatever reason. The first swings I'm going to take might be a miss. It might take me longer to swing it than what the stats actually say on the weapon, until I've reached a certain point where I'm comfortable holding this weapon and using it. Once I've got that, my swings start to hit more frequently, as they should do. Those kind of things should come into effect as well.
So not to take us completely away from crafting here, but what do you think about, because, trust me, I have opinions on weapon skills, but what do you think about the idea that different types of weapons or types of armor might enable different abilities based on skill level? So, for example, let's say you have a longsword. Maybe that longsword, if you have a high enough skill in longswords, allows you to parry, or allows you to disarm your opponent. Compared to that, maybe you have a battle axe. Well, that battle axe doesn't let you disarm an opponent, but if you have a high enough skill with that battle axe, maybe you can stun on a critical hit. What do you think about that sort of thing adding to meaningful choices for adventurers?
100%. It should be like that, because it comes down to, it doesn't matter how you play your class, you still have value within the group, within society, within the game. You might have that battle axe and Lex has a longsword. Does that make you less valuable? No. One parries, the other one has a critical hit. Or whatever. You know, it comes down to choice and preference again. So it's definitely something that I think needs to be done nowadays. Stop catering to everybody can be the hero, and only going down this certain path matters and actually is meaningful. Why? Why do it like that? Because it's the easy way to do it.
Crafting perspective. Oh, go ahead, Lex.
I was just saying, I'll always be in favor of variety, but don't overdo it. Don't confuse me with options, but give me variety.
Yeah, exactly.
From a crafting perspective,
getting four different kind of things on a weapon, no problem. If it's all of a sudden now you get like 10, and now you get a new sword, and then there's 10 completely different, but then you get another sword, and it's 10 completely different. All of a sudden now I'm just like, oh my god.
Look, download our handy spreadsheet tool to keep track of your gear. You'll be fine.
Exactly.
No.
There you go.
But no, from a crafting perspective, I like the idea of different weapons and different types of armor doing different things, because again, it plays to that diversity, right? You know, if I see two warriors out there in the world, they're making different choices based on what they want to emphasize. And as a crafter, that means that if I wanted to specialize one way or the other, there would be a viable market for that thing that I'm specializing in. Instead of making the same things that everyone else is making and trying to sell them to the same people. You know, it allows more crafters to operate and be fulfilled.
Let's go wild here right now. Here we go, Lex. This is one for you, mate.
Oh, hell.
We have limitations.
I mean, let me hear it.
We have limitations on what we can frickin' wear, right? So,
I don't know, maybe.
Let's get rid of that. Let's say, for instance, you can actually learn as a frickin' Direlord to wear plate armor, or as a cleric to wear, you know, cloth or leather or this or that. You know, go wild with it. Why do I have to wear plate?
That means that each armor has to intrinsically have an upside and downside.
Yeah.
Like for plate armor, obviously it's heavier. You know, because a lot of people would say you can't move as well in plate armor, but there's been a few YouTubers out there that have kind of proven that a little wrong for the most part. It's just that it's heavier. It slows you down. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't swing a sword. And then yet it's like, is the negative worth the benefit? But then it's like, you know, cloth versus leather. On a typical MMO, this would be very difficult to actually do correctly. In Pantheon, I don't feel like it would, because suddenly you have climates. Obviously, if you wear a big metal suit of armor in the middle of the Sahara Desert, your butt's gonna die.
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest challenge, like, you know, because ultimately everybody's going to go for plate armor.
Yeah.
Bards, clerics, rangers, everybody's going to wear plate armor because it's the most effective. No, you have to have different situations that merit the use of it, but take away this limitation of you can only wear cloth as a mage. Why? Why can a mage only wear cloth?
Well, you could even go on further, like in terms of the detrimental effects. You could just say that actions cost a little bit more the higher up the AC tiers you go. Mm-hmm. So if I was a warrior, but if I was wearing a nice flowing gown, you can picture that for a minute. Obviously, I'm gonna be able to jump all acrobatic, spinning my swords around, and just go freaking slicey dicey.
Just with a mage, Sean, just to say a mage needs that freedom of movement and quick movement of his hands to be able to cast spells in that way. And if he's wearing heavy armor, he's not going to be able to do the movements that he needs to do the spells.
Other things though, Josh.
Like what?
He's got plenty
Get
of
hit in the
stuff
face.
He can do. Right?
Sorry?
He's got his staff, for instance. He can use his staff.
Yeah, but he's got to obviously perform various maneuvers with his arms.
If you're a mage and you can't cast spells, you're going to be like, yeah, we're all a warrior.
Class should be able to do that. But there are classes where this is something that merits it. Right?
Well, I'm just saying to you the reason why mages cannot wear heavy armor.
Let's take a mage, for instance. What happens if you have a white mage who does healing, who actually does physical healing magic? He might have to wear plate, because he's obviously going to be something that's going to be attacked a lot more, because he's a healing mage, but wearing the plate armor protects him better.
I'm gonna go alpha nerd here for a second. That stems from D&D, and clerics would wear plate because they don't cast spells. They're basically praying to their god to cast a spell for them, or something to that effect. I've been out of the D&D loop for a while. Whereas mages had to do arcane symbols and syllables and use stuff or ingredients.
I want to go back to something you said, Lex, where you were talking about moving in armor, and I'm going to out myself a little bit here, but I can tell you from experience that moving in armor is more about skill and the construction of the armor than it is about the type of armor. Like, the first time you wear chain, you have to learn how to move in that stuff, and same for plate. And I know that from real world experience. I'm
glad you have that.
Yeah, and so maybe the missing link here, just like weapons have weapon skills that enable you to get better at using the weapon and maybe allow you to access different abilities like disarms or parries or whatever. Maybe the game should have armor skills too that represent your familiarity with the type of armor, and maybe that's the missing link.
That's something that I think I would enjoy, but I would have to be in a game that had it in order to actually figure it out, because I can't quite put myself in that position. Like, would it mean that certain armors would require a certain amount of skill? Because then if you have a person who's a little indecisive, what happens? Do they end up being just getting super low level armor? Then you've got to worry about exploits. Can you just sit there and let a little level 1 goblin beat on you and just be like, I'm gaining experience and plate? A lot of considerations. I think that is one of those features, or at least that would merit a developer to put it in, experiment with it, figure out if it works or not for their specific game, not necessarily for Pantheon. I would love to see somebody try it. I would try that game. I don't know if I'd love it or not, but I would certainly give it I would go into it with an open mind to see for myself.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about because we talk about, different kinds of armor having different detrimental effects, and then emphasizing that based on, what climate you might be fighting in. Like, wearing a silk shirt is probably not a great idea on top of a glacier. So if you think about that, that's great, but you have to give the character in the game some way to represent or some way to mitigate those detrimental effects. And so skill is a good way to do that from a mathematical perspective. Now, you call that like an awesome problem, which is like great. So they're just going to go stand in a low-level zone and let a goblin beat on them to raise their skill. You have to think about how do characters gain skill, in terms of
scratch
everything.
leg. That's all he's going to be doing.
Right.
Going to scratch that itch.
But, there is one great equalizer in a lot of these high fantasy games. That's magic. Why does it work? Magic!
Yeah, that's your fix-all.
Or you could just do it the EA way. It's in the game.
Oh, yeah. EA Sports. It was in the game. We lost it.
Exactly.
All right. So we've been at this for a couple of hours now.
We have. This has been a long one.
Yeah, so maybe let's do something fun to wrap it up. I'm curious to know what kind of crafting you guys would do in Pantheon. What, blacksmithing, tailoring, leatherworking, cooking. What kind of crafting do you guys think you would want to do?
I go armorsmith because I'm a career tank and I'm all about that metal.
Okay, and I would do something like alchemy or cooking, so it can enhance and benefit everybody in the group or raid.
I'm going to do cartography. I'm going to make maps.
So you're just setting the stage for your next show there is what you're doing.
Oh, we've done a show on that already, so...
Yeah.
We talked
I think the community's ready for another one.
Yeah,
I hope not.
For me, it's tailoring. I'm going to be the cleric that wears cloth armor. Trust me.
You just want to run around a G-string. Don't deny it.
I'm all about the bags, man. I'm all about the bags. You want
Yeah.
bags?
I'm wearing nothing else.
I'll make you some bags. I'll provide you all with bags. See, Ex-Smoker says he's actually confirming he was there for the map show. It happened. It's not a lie.
I try to forget. That. Why do you do that to me, Moko?
Cool. So yeah, I don't know if anybody that's watching right now has questions for us, but I think we've kind of gone through everything we can really talk about in one show.
Well, the one thing that I was curious about is, should crafting actually be linked to guilds in the sense of building up a guild and making sure that they enhance the guild in some sort of a way?
Definitely. If you want to build a guild house, it requires all your crafters to do it. Things like that. Also, you could have having crafters in your guild could open up unique opportunities as well that those crafters get, that kind of add to the reputation of your guild within a society, within a faction, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of ifs there, right? I mean, so when housing is added to Pantheon, not if, absolutely crafting should matter for that, and it should matter for any sort of guild housing or guild halls.
I can see it now. You want a house? Build it your damn self.
I envision a housing system that is not exactly like Vanguard's, but very close, right? Where you get multiple types of crafters to build the materials that you use to go create that house. And I would love to see that in Pantheon at some point. If there's a guild progression system, then absolutely, I think crafters and gatherers should play into that somehow, whether that's through completing writs and quests out there in the world, or maybe making items and turning it into NPC factions or whatever. But I think most importantly, it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier about how adventurers should need crafters for more than just the items that they're wearing.
Yep.
So, the reason to have crafters in your guild would be like, hey, we want to go raid this thing, or we want to go do this event, but we need some crafters that are actually present at the event or at the raid in order to unlock something or build defenses, or interact with the
Right.
environment in some way.
Right.
I think that's
You get a blacksmith and a carpenter in the raid, and all of a sudden now they can make use of a broken down trebuchet, and because they're crafters and they're not necessarily adventurers, there's an option of them to just basically sit at a distance and lob big stones at them, at whatever you're killing.
Just take a tailor and a blacksmith, for instance, and add the option of, being able to mend in the field on a raid. Think about that aspect for one thing. Add ways that you can actually have. Maybe the crafter has to take some, or the raid has to carry some freaking. They have to take this mobile anvil and sewing machine with them. Just as a, to give you a visual to it.
We're going adventuring. Pack your singer.
Right, let's go to my campsite idea. You can actually set up a campsite inside a raid. And at that campsite, because you've got a blacksmith with you and a tailor, and you've unlocked that skill as a blacksmith or a tailor, you can actually now mend in the field in a raid. You know how valuable you're going to be for your raid? Now, your tank doesn't have to spend thousands and thousands of plat on rep costs anymore. Because now he's got his blacksmith with him, and they've got the campsite set up to be able to actually mend in the field. The same goes with the tailor, the cloth wearers and everything, the leather wearers. You actually fix things. So there's always, adding that aspect to it brings a lot of value. Same with alchemists. Having an alchemist be able to craft pots in a raid in the field. So there's no more downtime. There's no more, hey, we're going to have to pick this up tomorrow. No, let's go and do half an hour longer, but we'll give Josh 10 minutes quickly to go make the pots that we're missing. Off you go, Josh. Josh sits at the campsite making those pots. Let's do this one more time. Let's try and get this encounter down. Here's all your pots, guys. There's so many ways they could add to that, especially for the raiding side of things. They can add things like that into it, where you can have like mobile stations, but make it meaningful. We know in Amberfett there's going to be crafting stations. Maybe something like that is going to be something where we can interact. Where if you have adventure / crafter in your raid, they'll be able to interact with those things and create certain unique items or mend stuff and everything.
I liked Lex's example of the trebuchet. Anything that has crafters like creating siege engines, I'm all down. I'm down.
Sign my ass up.
And then he built a trebuchet just outside of Throne Fast. I want to go to X dungeon. Hang on, get on my trebuchet.
Exclusive, one time only.
Fast travel.
Lexer's trebuchet rides. Halflings go free.
Can we put you on the trebuchet? No, you can't. That's fast travel for you there.
Oh,
that's a waste. That's a waste of good fish stick.
Oh.
Don't waste food. Come on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess, have we run out of questions? I think we've run out of questions.
I don't know. Have we run out of thoughts? Any additional thoughts, Josh? There.
Nah, I'm good.
Never, but I've been here too long already.
I mean, I could go on for hours and hours and hours, but I want to be respectful to you guys.
Hey,
so maybe we should wrap it up.
I can sit here till 7 o'clock in the morning, mate.
Trust me, he can.
Oh yeah.
Like during the after the show here, we'll probably sit around and talk for a couple minutes. If you let him, he will keep you here for the next 4 hours. And I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating or anything.
Energizer Bunny, he just keeps going and going and going and going.
Somebody just needs to distract him with something shiny after each show, so that everybody else can escape.
Shinies won't work for me. Trust me, I hate shinies. Something I despise with a passion.
Oh, but I love shinies.
Damn EverQuest 2 with their shinies.
I love shinies.
So what Yarn is saying is that he's actually secretly addicted to shinies, and he doesn't want to fall off the wagon.
Probably.
You notice he's not mentioning about all the times he would beat me to the shiny in groups.
Probably just to hear you get aggravated.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yarn's a nice guy that way.
Actually, they actually recently, when we went back to it, they actually opened it up where shinies are now basically need or greed loot. It used to be whoever picked up the shiny first had it. That's it. It's your shiny. But now it's basically open if you need it or greed it. So.
Oh.
But yeah, I used to hate shinies. I want to see shinies in Pantheon. No shinies. I'm going to put
Yes,
out a
shinies.
petition.
Yes, shinies.
We need 10,000 signatures.
And they're all going to be signed Frogzar.
Yeah.
Alright, so I guess that's it. Neff, thanks for joining us and leading this discussion. Oh,
we do have one question.
There's one question.
It's a very important question.
It is. I'm not asking it.
Well, ask it then, Shy.
Well, I thought you were going to take it away from me there.
Why would I take away your questions? That's the only thing you do.
Excuse me? What?
She's been back for one show and he's already freaking just going for the throat.
Oh, you just wait until we log off. You just wait. I'm going to be nice.
Hey, you're getting a talking to.
Wait.
Part of it all.
You SOB. Vishal's Gaming wants to know, how did Lex become such an authority on Beanie Babies?
Because I am no, I don't. I have one. Because we found it in the closet when we moved into this house. Oh, Bandit's sleeping on it. We found the moose and then a year later we found the actual silver coin in the yard. So
I have 73 Beanie Babies.
But I became an authority because I am a wealth of absolutely random and useless knowledge.
I have 73 Beanie Babies, and they're all smoochy frogs.
Somebody's gonna have to go and link me these Beanie Baby things.
Just don't.
Smoochy
Only
frogs
madness lies that way.
Anyway, Neff, again, thanks for joining us. We'll definitely have to do this again at some time. You ever have something you want to bring up, a discussion or anything, or you see something that you're doing that is worth a discussion, always hit us up. We're always looking for crafting discussions to go in between our shows, so we don't run out of things to talk about. And now that, you know...
not me. Don't take me. I don't like any of you.
Now that we've had the DRT as well, and like you said, you pointed out, things are still pretty much up in the air, unlikely to change. There's no better time than this to actually talk a lot more about crafting, to see what the community and us as players really want, and help VR, make crafting as good as we all want it to be. So again, thanks for coming on. Next week we will be talking about community next week and content creation. There was a post on Reddit about basically content creators, who you like, who you hate. And
we have to go over who we like and who we hate.
And there were actually some interesting points made that actually merit a discussion about this, about content creators, why we do what we do.
I posted it and never went back.
Why we do what we do, and there's also the perspective of the viewership. What they disliked, but there's merit to why people are...
Why do you do what you do? Because Yarn has dirt on me, and as long as I cooperate, you'll never know what it is.
So that's going to happen next week. We will have Minus with us next week as well. He'll be joining us for that. We're still waiting on a few other people to confirm if they want to join us, be available. So I'm waiting on that. So Minus will definitely be there. And whoever else, be it Baz, Nate, we'll have to see who else is going to be able to jump on.
My money's on that Minus shows up, and that's it.
That's going to happen next week. Community discussion, talking about community, talking about content creation, and why it's important that we do what we do as content creators, because there was a lot of complaints basically going on about the rinse and repeat of the discussions. But there's actually merit and value behind why it's important that this happens. You guys know yourselves at the VOT, we ain't fans of rinse and repeat and copying what others do. But that does not mean it's a bad thing that it happens. We all have our unique communities, but we'll get into that next week. And let's leave that as a hint as to what the discussion is going to go about. Anyway, have a great weekend, and we'll see you all next week.
Have a good one, guys.
Don't call me, I'll call you.
Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody.